Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 484. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about shipwrecks, 1812 history, and the country's second national park as we go to the UP, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We'll be opening up that trip to Cambodia in 2016 pretty soon. If you want to know when that's happening, get on the email list or join the private trip group at amateurtraveler.com/trip. And now let's talk about the UP. I'd like to welcome to the show Jennifer Schuitema from Grand Rapids, Michigan, who has come to talk to us about the UP. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I say the UP, and we've already gone into jargon. Where are we really talking about today?
So the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is a peninsula, obviously, bordered by Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin to the west, and Canada to the east, separated by the St. Mary's River. And it's connected to Michigan's lower peninsula by the Mackinac Bridge, which happens to be the longest suspension bridge in the Western Hemisphere.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, why should someone go to the Upper Peninsula?
Well, there's lots of reasons to go to the Upper Peninsula. Some of my favorites is that it really has a diverse natural beauty. Within a relatively short distance, you can experience the shores of three of the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, and Lake Superior. There are islands, rocky lake shore, sandy beaches, and inland of the Upper Peninsula, you have rivers, waterfalls, forests and bogs, and lots of wildlife. And then there's also a lot of history there, particularly Native Americans and early French explorers and missionaries, the early fur trade. This area is really important for the early fur trade. There's military history also. And then, of course, there's tons of recreation in the UP. There's camping, hiking, fishing, canoeing, kayaking, hunting. And then if you're into winter activities, which I'm not particularly, but lots of people are, there's snowmobiling, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, and dog sledding. And then one of my favorite things about the UP is that it's remote.
Okay. And you mentioned before we were recording this, when we were talking, that we just did an episode on a road trip in Ontario, and we're just only a few miles away from where that road trip took us.
Yes. So your guest's westernmost point on her road trip is about 3 hours from my easternmost point, Sault Ste. Marie.
So this could, in fact, be the second week of a very long and interesting road trip up in both the Canadian as well as the U.S. I would say countryside. That doesn't sound quite right. Wilderness doesn't.
Wilderness.
It sounds, yeah, okay.
Wilderness. Yes, my husband is already afraid. I've already extended our road trip another week, and he's very afraid.
Okay. Well, let's talk about getting there. First of all, if I'm flying in, I'm probably flying into
Detroit would be the closest hub airport, and it's about 4 hours from Mackinac City, which is the northernmost point in the Lower Peninsula.
Okay. And usually when people talk about where they're from in Michigan, you hold up your left hand, and Mackinac Point would be the top of my middle finger there in the state.
It would, yes.
There we go. And people don't draw the rest of it when they hold up their hand. They're completely forgetting the Upper Peninsula.
Yes. So you have to put your other hand up there too.
Okay, there we go.
And I'm from Grand Rapids, so I'm not from the UP.
Right.
I'm
You're
further
down
south.
from the lower left-hand portion of the state.
Yes.
Excellent. So what kind of itinerary would you recommend for us as we explore the Upper Peninsula?
Okay, so I did put together an itinerary taking into account the 7-day rule.
It's more of a guideline.
So my first stop is Mackinac Island, and I like to spend at least 2 nights on the island. And then I'm going to take us up to Paradise, Michigan after that. But there's definitely alternatives to going up to Paradise and still staying in the eastern UP. One of them would be the Newberry and Seney area, and I'll mention a couple things about that. But mainly I'm going to concentrate on going up to Paradise, which is on the Lake Superior shoreline. And then I'm going to take us to Sault Ste. Marie, and then finally Sugar Island. But I'm also going to offer an alternative to Sugar Island, which is Drummond Island.
Okay, excellent. And almost all of that in the U.S. and in Michigan, except for Sault Ste. Marie, we're going to cross over briefly into Canada.
Oh, no. There's Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan.
I see. Okay.
We're going to stay in Michigan.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, let's do that then a little slowly. You mentioned Mackinac Island, and while we were preparing for this show, I mentioned I have actually been to Mackinac Island, and it is one of, if not my first memory in the world, was getting lost on the ferry to Mackinac Island when I was 2, and that's the last time I was here. So I probably should have you explain why I want to go to Mackinac Island and what we would do there, because my memories on that are a little more vague.
Okay, so the thing with Mackinac Island is it can be just a day trip. And I think that a lot is lost in a day trip.
Let's talk about what Mackinac Island is first,
Sure.
and then let's talk about whether we should day trip it or spend 2 nights, as you were suggesting.
Okay, so it's an island in the Straits of Mackinac, which is the strip of water that runs between the Lower and Upper Peninsula. The Mackinac Island is on the Lake Huron side.
Okay.
It's about 8 miles around, so it's not like a huge island. You can easily bike or walk around it. And it happens to be the second national park after Yellowstone. It's no longer a national park, but for 20 years it was the second national park of the U.S.
And I did not realize that. Why was it named a national park?
There was a fort that was still, I don't know, manned, I guess, by the U.S. military, and it was gaining popularity as a tourist destination. And I'm not sure of the logistics of it, but because there was a fort that was operated by the federal government, became a national park first, and that was in 1875. And then in 1895, the fort was no longer being used for the military purposes, and it was turned over to the state.
Okay. And you mentioned a fort and you mentioned military history. When I hear of forts in this area, I'm guessing they date back to the War of 1812.
Actually, this fort dates back to the Revolutionary War, but yes, it saw...
We did invade Canada once before the War of 1812. We just did a lot more in that area, and the War of 1812 was why I was guessing that. Okay.
But it did see action, if you want to call it that, in the War of 1812. It was originally built to protect the straits, and the fur trade was really important. And that was like a route, and the island was part of the fur trade. So originally the French, this was under the control of the French, and they had Fort Mackinac, which was in current-day Mackinac City.
Okay.
And then the British took it over. I'm not exactly sure what year that was, but they...
Well, it would have been the what we call the French and Indian War.
Yes, there you go. So when the British took over that fort in the Lower Peninsula, they didn't feel that was a strategic location. So they moved the fort to higher ground on Mackinac Island. And it was a British-built fort during the Revolutionary War. It was actually built in 1780. After the Revolutionary War, they didn't turn over control of the fort until 1796 to the Americans. And then during the War of 1812, they retook the island.
Okay. And just while we pause here for a second, the European name of that war is the 7 Years' War.
Okay.
So, but why should one go today to Mackinac Island? What is different about it?
Well, I still enjoy going to the fort, but there are many reasons to go there. First, I just want to say that there's a downtown Main Street that is lovely and quaint and beautiful and well preserved, and it's a National Historic Landmark District. I just prefer not to spend a whole lot of time there. For a lot of the things I'm going to mention, bikes are really important, because I should also mention that there are no cars on the island. That's an important
No cars allowed
point.
on the island, we should say.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No cars allowed on the island. So the main mode of transportation would be bikes or horses. There are lots of horses on the island. But for my itinerary, bikes are really important. We bring our own bikes, but there are rental bike companies on the island. I'd suggest asking about multi-day rates, because it can be quite expensive, as can many things on the island. And then we should also mention getting from the mainland to the island. There's 3 ferry services. I prefer Shepler's, but the other 2 get you there just as well. And you can take the ferries from either Mackinac City in the Lower Peninsula or St. Ignace in the Upper Peninsula. My cousin, Tam, who is also a huge fan of the island, she prefers to take the ferry from St. Ignace. It's a lot less crowded. It's much more laid back. It's just not as big of a service, so the parking isn't as crazy. And I agree with her that going from Mackinac City sometimes can be a little bit stressful. Getting your luggage off, getting it to a port, or getting it on the ferry, it is a little bit more laid back in St. Ignace. And then once you get to the island, depending on where you're staying, depends on how your luggage gets from the docks to your hotel. So you'll want to make sure you know how your hotel handles that transfer.
Now, that also implies we know where our hotel is before we go, which is what you're recommending.
Oh, yes. You will. If you're going to stay on the island, you definitely need reservations.
And how far in advance in high season, which is summer?
Months in advance. My mother-in-law, she also loves the island, and she marks her calendar every year for when the hotel reservations open up for the one she stays at, and she calls that day. I have had luck in the past a couple months before, but there have also been times where I've wanted to stay at a particular hotel and have had to choose a different one because they were booked up for the time I wanted to go. So it's not something that you can just call up a week ahead and going to get a reservation.
And when you talk about the hotel you want to stay at, do you prefer one of they have great big stately hotels that look like they're out of the turn of the 1900s, or they have some of the smaller inns and such? What is your preference?
Okay, so I think you probably are referring to the Grand Hotel. Mm-hmm. And I do love to stay at the Grand Hotel, but that's not typically where we stay. We've stayed there a couple times. And it's quite expensive. Mm-hmm. My personal preference, where if I'm not going with a group of people, it's just my immediate family, we typically choose the Harborview Inn. It's not on downtown Main Street, which I like. It's about halfway between the end of Main Street and Mission Point Resort.
Okay. And
I think it's a good compromise. You're not in the busy area, but you can still easily get there. You can walk there, bike there very quickly. And it, in my opinion, for the island, it's very reasonably priced, and it includes breakfast, which is a nice little bonus. And if you're lucky, you'll get a great view of the Straits from that hotel. And then my cousin Tam would kill me if I didn't mention the Main Street Inn and Suites. She loves it. It is right on downtown Main Street. They stay there every year. It's very nice. You get a kitchenette, which is not something you would normally get in a Mackinac Island hotel room. They have turn down service. They leave fudge on your pillow.
Fudge. Oh, okay.
Yes, because we'll get into that
yep,
too.
Okay. I'm ahead of you there.
It's very nice. It's not the spot that I prefer to stay in.
Okay.
And then the Grand Hotel that you mentioned is, I do love staying at the Grand Hotel, but when I'm there, I feel it is a resort. So mm-hmm. I feel more like isolated, and like you paid a lot of money to stay there, so you want to stay there and do the things they have. You want to swim in the Esther Williams pool and play croquet on the lawn and be there rather than biking and doing all the other things that are wonderful to do on the island.
Okay, excellent. We have to talk about the fudge.
So I don't actually know the origin of why there's fudge there, but there are several fudge shops, and it is very good, and they make it right there in the front, and it's great to watch them pour it out on the marble slabs and shape it and slice it. It is kind of mesmerizing to watch, and it's really good to eat. I always buy some before I leave, and they have other wonderful candies, and each fudge shop is basically a huge candy shop as well.
Okay. And have you been to the Fudge Festival?
No. I've been to the Lilac Festival, and Festival of the Horse is also a great time to go. That's in early August. And they have horse parades. Smaller kids can ride horses within a corral, and there are lots of activities. Mackinac Island has a great website that lists all the details of their festivals. And then the Lilac Festival is in early June. And then there's also the Chicago Yacht Club's Race to Mackinac, which is in July.
Okay. From Chicago, one would guess?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Now, we haven't even made it to the Upper Peninsula yet. Are there other things we should cover in Mackinac Island before we leave the island? Okay.
Definitely. So now we have a hotel reservation. And when we get to the docks and make sure our luggage is being transferred, we prefer to go directly to the fort. We usually arrive around lunchtime, and there's a great restaurant up there run by the Grand Hotel called the Tea Room. Now, the food may not be great, but I mean, it is. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not like farm to table or anything like that. It's just good, regular food. But the view is amazing. You're up on a former military fort, and it's right along the edge of the cliff, and you've got a great view of the Straits and downtown and all the great buildings that are on the island. And then when we're done with lunch, you're now at the Revolutionary War Fort. So you've got to spend some time there, and they do cannon fires, rifle fires, marches, kind of living history kind of stuff. And we have a 11-year-old, and when she was about 6, I'd say we really started getting more into the fort because we wanted her to know about the history. And then I was like, wow, this is really cool. I've been going here my whole life, and I really didn't know all of this. And it really is quite interesting. And then with your admission to the fort, you also have access to the historical buildings on Market Street, which is right behind Main Street. And I recommend finishing out that tour. There's, again, living history, reenactments. My daughter's favorite is the working blacksmith. Every time we've gone, it's been a young woman who is the blacksmith that day, and it's operational. They're making things right in front of her, and she thinks that's so cool that a woman is making these awesome things and you can actually buy the things they make. So she thinks that's really cool. And then after the fort and Market Street, we typically go back to our hotel at that point, and we like to stop at Dowd's Market, which was right at Fort and Main Street. It's a great grocery store on the island, and pick up just something for dinner and just kind of relax in our room, enjoy the view, and rest up for the next day. Because as soon as day 2 comes, we are on our bikes. We either bike around the island and stop at British Landing, where the British invaded the island in the War of 1812, and see St. Anne's Church and Mission Church and all of the great things around the island. Or we'll go into the interior of the island and bike the interior, where there's limestone formations to see. Arch Rock is a landmark that you have to see when you're on the island, and you can get to it from biking around the island. From the shoreline, you can walk upstairs, or you can see it from the interior of the island as well. And it's definitely worth the stop. There's also the Fort Post Cemetery, which is an old cemetery on the interior of the island, and it's maintained by Veterans Affairs. So it's very nice and peaceful.
Okay.
I like the interior of the island. It's quiet. It's tree covered. It's not quite so crazy with tourists and busyness.
Excellent. We probably need to move on to other parts of the Upper Peninsula so that this is not a 2-hour show.
So, yeah, yes, absolutely. I'm just going to wrap up a few Mackinac Island things. You can go horseback riding on the island. You can kayak on the island. And then just to mention a few other restaurants that we really enjoy. The Jockey Club, which is right on the Jewel, the Grand Hotel's golf course. And then also over at Mission Point, which is a really pretty place, is the Bistro on the Greens. It's outside. You've got a great view of the Straits. They have an executive putting green, which my daughter loves. So if that interests you, we can do the putting green there while you're over at Mission Point having lunch. And then the Woods, which is another restaurant run by the Grand Hotel, is out at Stonecliff. So it's a little bit more secluded, quiet, and the venison medallions are the way to go out at the Woods.
Where to next?
If you've started in Mackinac City, you'll now cross the bridge. And you've got a couple options here for direction. I'm going to suggest going up to Paradise because it's on Lake Superior. I love to be on one of the lakes. That's my big thing.
Now, why Lake Superior? Because you had a choice of 3.
Well, Lake Superior is the biggest and the coldest, and just there's something a little bit mysterious about Lake Superior. And I can go to Lake Michigan. I can drive 45 minutes and be at Lake Michigan anytime I want. And I've already been to Lake Huron because I was on Mackinac Island, so I'm going to head to Lake Superior next.
Okay.
It would be wrong of me not to suggest that someone could head over to the Sini and Newberry area, where there is also wonderful things. The Seney National Wildlife Refuge. There's canoeing, kayaking, bird watching would be a great thing there in the wildlife refuge. And if you're going to head over to that area, you're going to want to stay.
And where is that area?
That is headed a little bit. You're still in the eastern UP.
Mm-hmm.
You're just a little bit inland. You're not on one of the lakes. You're more in the center of the UP, but still in the eastern UP. You'll want to stay at Chamberlain's Old Forest Inn if you're going to stay in the Seney, Newberry area.
Okay.
But up in Paradise, it is very small. I don't even think it's really like a town, but it has a couple small town hotel or motels, I would call them. And then it also has one regular hotel, and it's called Magnuson Grand Hotel. It's right on Lake Superior, and they have access on their property to like a sandy beach right on the lake. And they also have a pool, which could be important for families traveling with kids. Kids love pools. Oh, and then one other thing, I gotta bring us back a little bit. When you cross over the bridge into St. Ignace, if you are interested in trying a pasty.
Okay. Like the Cornish pasties, so it's a pastry, looks like a calzone or a turnover that's filled with meat, cheese, and that sort of things?
Yes, to me it looks like a calzone. That's perfect.
Okay.
I like that description.
Do you know why? You know why it looks the way it does?
I don't know why.
It's the history of it. So it has a lip of where the pastry gets folded over itself, right? That closes it up. And the Cornish miners would hold on to that and eat the rest of it and throw that away because they were tin miners and their hands would be contaminated with the metal that they'd been mining. And so they needed some part of it that they weren't going to eat. And that became the handle of the lunch that they would bring.
That's great. I didn't know that. So if you do want to try one of those, which is like a UP tradition, you'll want to stop at Bessie's in St. Ignace, and you'll want to get the chicken pasty plate, which comes with coleslaw.
Okay, and that's pretty soon after we get over the bridge.
Yeah, St. Ignace is immediately on the other side. And you can Google it and get the address. It's totally Googleable.
I bet anybody there could tell us too.
Yes. And then so up in Paradise, the reason I took us up there is because it's very close to Tequamanon Falls and to Whitefish Point. So the main attraction is the upper and lower falls of the Tequamanon River. There is a 4-mile hike between the upper and lower falls. You can drive between the two if you'd like. The upper falls is much more dramatic, and they are one of the larger waterfalls east of the Mississippi. But the lower falls are very pretty too. They're more serene, I would define them as. And often the water is stained a rusty color, and that's from the cedar tannins.
Okay.
Also at the upper falls is the Tequamanon Falls Brewery and Pub Restaurant, and it marks the location of the former Camp 33, which is the logging company that originally owned much of that area.
Oh, okay.
And you can eat there, and my husband says they have good beer. I'm not a big beer drinker, but...
I should say, since we were hiking 4 miles here between the upper and the lower falls, what time of year do you recommend for this? I know that sometimes the mosquitoes get a little thick up here, and sometimes the snow gets a little thick. So is there an optimal time to go?
I have typically gone during the summer and fall.
Mm-hmm.
The falls, because of the beautiful color tours, the fall color tour.
And about when? Early fall, since we're relatively far north?
I believe the peak color season is like the last week in September and the first 2 weeks in October. I'm not a real cold weather person. A lot of people do enjoy being up there in the winter. It's just not something I'm particularly interested in. Snowmobiling is really big up there. The brewery actually closes down like in the late fall and the early spring, but they're open in the winter for the snowmobile season.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
the
Okay.
late fall, and then the early spring is like kind of like the dead zone, I guess I would call it.
Okay.
I've been to Mackinac Island in the spring, and it was kind of rainy and cold, and you don't have the benefit of the colors. I wouldn't go in the spring, but
So summer to early autumn for the UP and for Mackinac Island is what I'm hearing.
yeah.
Okay. Excellent. What else should we do? Where are we to next?
While we're over in the Tequamanen area, there's also great canoeing, kayaking right on the river. There's rental companies. And I know there's a rental company that's west of the Tequamanen State Park, but I believe on the other side of the lower falls, you can also rent kayaks. And then there's tons of trails. If you're bored by the falls, walk out on the trails there. There's lots of little lakes and beautiful trails to hike in. So north of Paradise, you'll want to visit Whitefish Point Light Station, which is another historic site on the National Register. The light tower has continuously operated since 1849 and it's the oldest operating lighthouse on Lake Superior. And it's pretty important since all of the freighters leaving and entering Lake Superior pass it by. This area of Lake Superior is known as the graveyard of the Great Lakes because of the number of shipwrecks right in this area. And Whitefish Point is home to the Shipwreck Museum.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the museum gives the maritime history of Lake Superior, its shipwrecks, and most notably the Edmund Fitzgerald. So the Edmund Fitzgerald sunk about 17 miles from Whitefish Point.
Got it. Famed of song and story.
Yes. And so the museum extensively covers how that happened and the history of that. And if you're really interested in lighthouses, you can actually stay overnight in the crew quarters of the lighthouse.
Oh, okay.
Reservations highly suggested. I've never done that, but it sounds pretty cool.
Okay.
And so after you've toured the buildings and the museum of Whitefish Point, be sure to walk down the boardwalk. There is a beautiful sandy beach right on Lake Michigan, and you get a nice view from this point in all different directions looking out onto Lake Superior. And one other thing to note about this is the Superior Birding Trail runs from Seney National Wildlife Refuge to the Whitefish Point Bird Observatory at Whitefish Point. And there are 14 sites. And from what I understand, it's a pretty important spot for migratory birds. I'm going to move on to Sault Ste. Marie.
Now, you say Sault Ste. Marie, and yet when I see this spelled, it's not spelled anything like that.
It is pronounced Sault Ste. Marie. It's French, and I believe it either means the Rapids of St. Mary or the Falls of St. Mary. And it's right on the St. Mary's River, and there is Sault Ste. Marie across the International Bridge. So there's Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And we're going to concentrate on Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, or the Sioux. And another thing, while you're driving from Paradise to Sault Ste. Marie, you're going to want to divert off of 123 onto Lake Superior Lakeshore Drive. It's a really pretty lakeshore drive, and stop at Point Iroquois Lighthouse, another great stop along the lake. You can't miss it. I would say that for most visitors, the Sioux Locks are the main attraction in Sault Ste. Marie. Yeah, the locks are operated by the Army Corps of Engineers, and they see about 10,000 ships a year. And they do close, I think, for about 3 months in the winter because of the ice. The main cargo is iron ore and coal. And so it's like serious business. It's working, functional, important locks. But you can go through them on a locks tour boat. And I have to confess that I haven't done the locks tour boat in many years. But my friend Melissa, she was just up there with her family last month, so I asked her to refresh my memory. And she said that it takes about 2 hours to do the locks tour, and you do go through both the American locks and the Canadian locks. And she thought she also has an 11-year-old daughter, and all three of them thought it was a great thing to do. And her daughter thought it was really cool that she could reach out of the boat and touch Canada. So, and one other thing about Sault Ste. Marie, it is the oldest city in Michigan.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yep, it was founded by the French in 1668. And originally it was a Native American village, and Father Marquette, who was a Jesuit missionary, he left his mark all over the UP and other places as well. And he helped establish the first mission in Sault Ste. Marie here in 1668. And it became a permanent city. And another important place for early fur trading. In Sault Ste. Marie, I've got a couple places to suggest for accommodations. My friend Melissa, she stayed at the Asquith Lockview Motel while she was there, and she described it as comfortable and affordable. When I've been there, I've stayed at the Ojibwe, which is a historic hotel, and it's now operated by Ramada.
Okay.
But I certainly would stay there again. It's not like super fancy, but you're in Sault Ste. Marie, so there's not a ton of fancy places to stay. And at the Ojibwe is the Freighter's Restaurant, which looks right over the locks. I've eaten there before. I don't remember the food much, but I definitely remember the view.
Okay.
And while you're in Sault Ste. Marie, you've got to try the whitefish. And the place you're going to try it is the Lockview Restaurant.
Okay.
That's the place to have it. They serve fresh caught that day whitefish. So that's where I'd go for that. And the other thing about the locks, if you don't want to do the 2-hour boat tour, there's a viewing platform there also that you can observe the comings and goings of the locks. And it's pretty impressive to see these enormous ships going through.
And I know that I'm a nerd, but I do enjoy those standing at the locks, whether it be the little locks at the Erie Canal or the great big locks at the Panama Canal. I do find it, if you haven't done it, you might be surprised how fun it is.
It's totally fascinating. It really is. It's amazing. And the locks, they are getting around the falls at the St. Mary's River, the rapids. I'm not sure what they qualify as.
The Sioux part of Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah. And the water does fall 21 feet there. So
okay.
The Sioux locks, they date back to 1855. So they've been around a while. And also in the Sioux, you'll want to go to the museum ship called Valley Camp. It's a museum that's located on a massive retired freighter.
Okay.
You can explore the whole ship and its exhibits. It's the oldest city in Michigan, so there are historical district. There's businesses that are very old, that the building has been preserved. And the main area of that is called Water Street Historic Block.
Okay.
So I think we're going to move on to Sugar Island. That's the last stop on my itinerary. So Sugar Island is where the St. Mary's River splits and forms Lake George and Lake Nicolette. And then those lakes kind of wrap around the island, and then the river reforms at the end of the island.
Now, we're just off the UP to the east of Sault Ste. Marie, so we didn't go very far here to get to Sugar Island.
No, it's a ferry. You do need to take a ferry. There's no bridge or anything, but it's very close. But it's surprisingly isolated. I've been to Sugar Island mainly because my cousin has a beautiful old cottage on Sugar Island. And when I was going to recommend people go to Sugar Island, I felt like I needed to brush up on how people stay on the island. And I was surprised at how little there is on the internet. It's like a dead zone for internet research. So I called up my cousin to make sure I could make some recommendations on staying there. And she said it is mainly vacation homes that you would need to find on like HomeAway
Mm-hmm.
or puremichigan.org. They have listings there of places to stay. There is one resort, and I'm going to call it a rustic resort, and it's called Timber Ridge. I would say, I don't know for sure, but it seems like it would cater more to like fishermen, hunters, boaters, that type of vacationer.
Now, it sounds like to me that in general, the reason we would go to the UP from Michigan is that it's more remote and more less city, more wilderness. And then the reason we'd go to Sugar Island is because there's just way too many people in the UP.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And it's an island. I love going to islands.
Okay.
I would call it a locals island. Like the
Okay.
bar, the Hilltop Bar, it's there for locals. It's not there for people coming over to stay on the island. And the gas station and the convenience stores are there for the people that live on the island. So the reason that I really like Sugar Island is because it's like one of those places, and there's not very many, that I just feel like I can actually relax, enjoy the view, sit in the Adirondack chairs, have like a fire by the shore or fire in the fireplace, and really kind of get away, which is funny in the UP because
You
when
have
I'm in the
already
UP,
gotten away. Yeah.
I have an agenda, but I still have an agenda when I'm in the UP.
Got
But
it.
there's not much of an agenda when I'm on Sugar Island. If you want to go for a canoe ride, you just pull the boat out into the water because you're already right there. It's not like a big deal to go for a hike, or you don't need a trail mat because you can just like walk across the street and walk in the woods. It's all right there for you to relax and enjoy. There are a couple of points of interest, though, that you just have to mention when you talk about Sugar Island, and that is Governor Osborne, who was a Michigan governor. He had a residence there, and he loved it. He loved it so much that when he died in Georgia, his body was brought up and buried on Sugar Island, his beloved Duck Lake or Duck Island. And you can go there. It's now his property is now the Osborne Preserve, which is open to the public. You can go hike there. There's 8 miles of lake shore, and you can still see the remains of his residence. There's kind of a block building there that was his library, and there's a chimney there. It's kind of ruins at this point, I would call it. And then a really early mission. I think that this mission actually predates Father Marquette's mission in Sault Ste. Marie. And there's the ruins of that also on the island. And the Native American history on this island is really, really old. I read one date and I was like, I'm not even going to repeat that because that's really, really old. And they came there for the sugar maples, which is why the island is called Sugar Island.
Okay. I'm going to guess it could go back easily 10,000 years.
It said 2,500 BC.
Sure. Yeah, I can easily believe that. Because you're talking about an area that's right there on the river where there's going to be plentiful game and fish. And if you're going to be living in this area at all, it's kind of a natural place to be defensible and those sort of things. Excellent. We need to start wrapping this up. Before we do, you limited the places that we wanted to go in the UP because, at my suggestion, because we talk about a 1-week trip. If we hadn't limited it that way, we've got actually most of the UP is still to our west from the places that we talked about today. Are there places that you edited for time that are worth mentioning?
Oh, yes. There are tons of places that I edited. I strictly limited myself to the eastern UP. But if you wanted to travel west along the Lake Superior shoreline to see Grand Marais, Grand Sable Dunes, Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, Munising, Marquette, those are all great places. But that's a completely separate trip that you cannot just go see that in a day. It's
Okay.
amazing up there. The North Country Trail runs right along that stretch of the UP. And then if you really want a big adventure, you can continue on to Houghton or Copper Harbor and take the ferry to Isle Royale National Park, which is actually part of Michigan, but that's a trek. And I've never done that. As definitely something that as a Michigander, I totally want to do. I am gung-ho for that, but
And the Isle Royal
yeah,
being the island that is the northernmost point of Michigan that the Canadian border
yes,
jogs around to include it. So,
yes.
okay, up there by Thunder Bay.
And then, as I had mentioned earlier, the Newberry Seney area, the Fox River, the Two-Hearted River, Seney Wildlife Refuge, those are all great places. And then if you even go further, there's the Porcupine Mountains. It's a great, great spot to be.
Okay, so just so people know, because people are going to write and say you talked about the UP and you missed my favorite spot, which is blank.
Oh, I know.
And it's true. We did.
Oh, totally.
we limited this, and sometime we'll come back and do the other half. What's going to surprise me about the UP?
So I think that a lot of people might be surprised by the vastness of the Great Lakes. I think a lot of people, when they hear the word lake, they aren't quite getting what the Great Lakes are.
That these are the largest inland freshwater seas in the world, some of the largest ones in the world, especially Superior, that sort of thing.
Right. Yes.
Well, and I was looking, Lake Superior, in terms of size, from end to end, is just a hair short of 350 miles.
Okay.
So that is pretty big.
Yes. And then just one other little surprising thing. This is like 20 years ago. It was the first time that my husband and I had gone to the UP together, and he was nervous about bears. And I was like, why are you worried about this? I just thought it was silly. And I was kind of annoyed, actually. And we're driving along. And the other thing I said to him, they're black bears. So I was like, they're just like big dogs. And we were driving along, and a black bear comes out of the woods right in front of our car. And I was really shocked. I think he was satisfied that I was proven wrong. And it was nothing like a big dog. So that was, yeah, that was pretty surprising to me. I don't like to be wrong. So, yeah.
I just thought of the other fact that is surprising to me about the size of the Great Lakes. So, of the world's fresh water, the Great Lakes, combined between the 5 of them, have 1/5 of the world's fresh water.
Yes. It's a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
And there's lots of conspiracy theories about stealing the water and all of that, too.
Well, we would like some of that in California, I will admit, if you could figure out a way to get it here.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything else we should know before we get up to the Upper Peninsula, before I get to my last 3 questions?
I would just make sure that you pack some cool weather clothes, even if it's in the summer. You can still get pretty chilly up there at night. And then you'll want to make sure you pack your favorite form of bug protection, particularly mosquitoes, flies. I'm always worried about ticks, but I did a little Google search, and they're not such a big problem in the eastern UP, but definitely ticks are a bigger problem west.
Okay. Last 3 questions. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in the UP.
You have to laugh and say only on Mackinac Island when you have road apple soup splattered on your back because you don't have fenders on your bike, and a local says told you so, because all the locals have fenders on their bikes because they don't want poop on their back.
Important safety tip there. Okay. Or
It
something,
is.
hygiene tip, maybe.
Oh my, it really, really happens.
Well, that just took a little bit of the fun out of biking on Mackinac Island. Fenders.
No,
Okay.
you still, no, just all the rental bikes have fenders too.
Good to know.
So if you rent a bike, they protect you well.
And finish this thought. You really know you're in the UP, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, when what?
When you've eaten fresh caught whitefish, when you've seen a freighter, and when you've touched Lake Superior.
Okay. And if you had to summarize the UP in just 3 words?
Up north,
That's 2.
fresh water,
That's 4.
and views. I know, I cheated.
I believe you
Sorry.
owe me 2 words here.
Yep.
If we have you come back
Yep,
on, you only get 1 word. So
Okay. But you have to love the views up there. They're wonderful. And the freighters. Don't miss out on the freighters.
excellent. Our guest again has been Jennifer Schuitema. Jennifer, where can people read more about your travels?
Occasionally, you can find me in the Passporter newsletter or on passporter.com, a Disney travel site, as a guest contributor. And if you're interested in picking up some reading for your trip to the UP, my husband, Adam Schuitema, has a novel set in the Upper Peninsula called Haymaker, and it was published this year by Switchgrass Books.
In what genre is the book?
It's literary fiction.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Thank you so much for having me.
In news of the community, we had some feedback on last week's show on Cameroon. Most of it positive. Let me read the one that was not, and that's from Tamara, who said, I was overwhelmingly dismayed by the constant derogatory remarks made about Africa by the host Francis and his patronizing manner with Rejoice, the country's native. In the many, many shows that I have listened to, this was the only episode that I actually felt so strongly about it that I had to write. Please do not use Francis again. He is offensive. By contrast, David, who is from Africa, said this: we Africans are usually very sensitive when non-Africans talk about our continent and dare to criticize it. Most Westerners come to Africa with their stereotypes firmly cemented and either view us as the smiling native, the noble savage, or the corrupt basket case. However, I really enjoyed listening to Francis. His love for Africa was obvious and earned him the right to be critical when the situation called for it. He's not made me want to visit Cameroon, and I'm from Nigeria, but I've really, really enjoyed listening to this episode. We will not always please everybody with that episode. I certainly understand where the criticism was coming from. I tried in the episode to point out that the criticism that was coming from Francis was from someone who is so much in love with Africa that he is planning on spending 5 years there. But I can understand that that didn't come through to everyone. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler because I've got to pack. We're off on a family trip to Europe tomorrow. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram as Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.